Hi, friends. Today's conversation is an absolute masterclass on how to protect your body as you age. Not about trying to live to 150 or 160 or chasing the latest supplement stack, but actually looking at how we age and how we can become immune to aging. I'm joined by Dr. Jenna Macciochi, an immunologist, author, and high performance breathwork coach whose work blends hard science with wisdom of daily life. And she's here to really unpack what your immune system is doing over the course of your lifetime, and why the slow burn of chronic inflammation is one of the biggest drivers of aging. We dive into so much in this episode, from why your mindset might be aging you faster than you think, to the power of nervous system regulation, and to how your kids literally sync to your heart rate. And Jenna really opens up about motherhood, burnout, intuition, and the rituals that she uses to stay grounded and healthy as a busy single mum. And her brand new book, Immune to Age: The Game Changing Science of Lifetime Health, is out on the 3rd of July. And I highly recommend grabbing a copy. We'll link to it in the show notes so you can pre order it. But now, let's dive into how you can become immune to age.
Dr. Jenna, it's amazing to have you here today. I've been looking forward to this interview for some time. There's so much now in the longevity space about how we age and what we need to be looking at. In your opinion, and based on all the research that you've done, which I know you're deep into, what would you say is the kind of biggest lie we've been told about aging?
It's a good place to start. Firstly, thank you for having me. I feel like I'm the longevity rebel because as much as I admire what's going on in the space, and you have everything from people like Brian Johnson to actual scientists in the lab trying to push the limits on human aging. I just think that we have to make the most of each day. Like, we're almost like living to this future goal and forgetting that we only ever really have the first moment, the moment that we're existing in. And so we kind of like rush through that to the future that's not even written yet.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think there's lots of people right talking on social media about I want to live to 160 or something like that, and almost forgetting to enjoy those special moments that, I see you
Mhm.
posting about on your Instagram. I know as a mum, like I have with my kids, they're just so treasured, and they go really quickly. They pass us by. I think one of the things that I've really picked up from your content is this concept that we've had this longevity revolution where we're living longer now. You and I were talking offline about how people are, 100 years ago, we couldn't have dreamt that we would live this long. But I know from my own experience with aging parents, we're not living well into old age. Many people aren't living well into old age. And there's sort of this 8 to 15 year potential decline with multiple medications and things. When I look at it and I look back at my parents' generation, it was pretty radical what happened to them in the
Mhm.
post-war era. It was exciting. They had TVs put in their homes for the first time, right? Previously, they had to go to the cinema. Everyone started having a car. Then microwaves came in. All of these sort of things that made us more comfortable, made life easier, came into their generation. We have vaccines. There was a pill for every ill. And I think now sort of the next generation is looking much more at, well, actually, how can I have a sense of purpose about my life? How can I live well? How can I embrace things like movement and good nutrition? Is that what you're seeing, that there's sort of this changing ethos around it?
Yes, yeah. I think when I started researching the book, I was less interested in sort of living to be 120, but I was looking at my grandparents on my dad's side, and I grew up on a tiny farm in Scotland, and my grandparents lived on the farm, and they both died when they were 95 and still lived in their own home working on the farm, and kind of just thinking about their generation to my generation and then my kids' generation. And now we are sort of waiting on a longevity revolution, because there is all this talk about how longevity escape velocity means that some of us alive today, there might be scientific interventions that can keep us alive to 140 years old. And I'm like, that is that really the goal that we should be chasing? Because we've already had this huge revolution that sort of happened under our noses, in that we are living longer than ever. Like the average age, the average lifespan is 80 something years in the UK, depending if you look at men or women. But the average health span is like 60. So you've got 20 years of slow death at the end of life. And if that continues, I don't know if I want to live to be 120, if the majority of that last piece of life is going to be, polypharmacy, like all these different interventions to keep me alive. I would rather be, with all my faculties, able to sort of enjoy life. And there was a study that came out just earlier this year that says that less than 10% of us make it to age 70 without a chronic condition. And so, when I look at my parents who are in their 70s and they're both very active and in very good health, I think that doesn't seem old anymore. But I certainly wouldn't want to be living with a chronic condition when I'm in my 70s. And so then you have to kind of work back from that and say, what do we need to do now to prevent that happening? Because it's those small things every day that are going to offset the risk of a chronic condition later in life. And I think this is a very human thing. This is where my interest in time kind of weaves in a more philosophical slant, because we're not very good at managing time. I mean, we live longer than ever, but how often do you hear people say how time poor they are? There's not enough time to do everything. And we always kind of like put off to our future selves to figure things out. And stuff like poor health and old age, it doesn't come from waiting till you get the symptoms. It comes from every decade that you lived before. And now that I'm a mother, I think about what I did in my childhood, growing up in the Scottish countryside. There was no takeaway food, there was no Deliveroo. Like, we grew our own vegetables. My mum was in catering. She cooked all her food from scratch. We were outside all day, every day. There was no Netflix. There was no, like, that just didn't exist. Gaming, everything. And then now I have like 10-year-old twins, and I'm like, how do I give their body the inputs that they need in this age, where every child is more sedentary? There's much more things to keep them sedentary, and to get them to eat a really good diet is hard when they go out in the big wide world and they're just bombarded with adverts for ultra processed food, and the culture is to have a really poor diet, and that's become the norm. And it just got me thinking about, we're kind of on this collision course where every generation is getting worse. So if we're already having the last 20 years of life in poor health now, what's that going to look like for my kids? It's only going to creep younger and younger. And then we have this whole field of science trying to keep people alive longer and longer. And it's like, at some point we have to join all the dots together and realize that right from before we even conceive our children, we have to be in the best health to give them the best health. And we have to really fundamentally shift some of the things that we have in society to keep people on the healthy trajectory.
And I guess what would be the answer then to someone who's listening to this, who is really busy? They're working, and I know this is you, right? You have 2 twins, you're a working mother, you're kind of juggling everything. What advice can you give to men and women, but I would say primarily women, because we carry so much of that invisible load, who are thinking, I don't have time. I commute. I'm 10 hours a day at work. I'm really struggling. I'm tired. I'm often having to log on in the evening. They've got a knowledge-based job that's really demanding of them.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think it is really like, I can, hard relate to all of that, because 2 things, like, society doesn't care about keeping you healthy. Society is really fueled by, advertising, marketing, getting you to buy stuff that you might not necessarily need, but it's telling you need it. And I think the other thing is that, your health doesn't care that your job is like, sedentary behind a computer 12 hours a day, stressful. Like, you can't sort of give your health a memo and go like, it's only for a few more years, and then once I get a promotion or once I reach a certain financial status. So we're kind of all caught in this trap, and myself included. I think perhaps because of my upbringing on the farm, in this very kind of wholesome environment, I've tried to replicate that for my kids. And I just think you have to drown out the noise that's around you and curate your own kind of bubble. Like the food that I keep in the house is only the food that I want me and my children to eat. So I'm not going to, I'm just making myself immune to all the advertising that's out there that's telling me I need to snack every 5 minutes, that this new high protein, fiber, whatever processed bar is the best thing ever to keep me going. I just kind of drown it all out and I take the hard route. And I would say that that has not been easy with twins. And I'm also now a single parent, and it's just it's taking the hard route, but knowing that that pays off dividends later on in life. And I think the other thing was like a real mindset shift. I A lot of what I've learned on my journey is that we can really hyper focus on the best diet, the best workout, the best, rituals for our health, like sauna, etc., the best supplements. But a lot of the time, what we're missing is like that, unconscious part of our mind that's got all these negative loops that we're trapped in without even noticing, and reframing things. So, sometimes I do find the balance with work and kids quite stressful, but then just having a really solid like meditation practice where I'm just really like taking that time to observe my mind and be like, okay, I can see, where I'm starting to run down these paths of like panic and stress, and zooming out and just, I don't know quite how to describe it. Maybe you have a similar experience, just that reframe of the things I get to do, that gratitude that I have this life, and I'm lucky enough to have this job that can be demanding, but I love it. I'm so interested in it. That reframe, because I find particularly in my journey as a parent, like there's a lot of negative narratives about like, oh my god, being a parent, and like and I just find that that is filtering down into our health. Like our bodies are listening to what our minds are saying, and particularly the unconscious part of our minds that we're unaware of. And so just creating space in your day to sort of just sit there and have that expansion of your consciousness, then you can sort of start to see where you might be going down these routes. And that then has an impact on everything, like your posture, how you hold your body, how you might eat or move in the day, because if you're in a negative mindset, like the psychology is just physiology repackaged. It's there, it's all directing our behaviors. So it's like kind of this filter down effect.
So what you're saying is creating space for even just 10 minutes a day can change your psychology, which then influences your physiology. I mean, I suppose when you asked there, have I had that experience? Yes, would be the answer. I would say that my journey back from burnout and being hospitalized with pneumonia and coming off all bipolar meds, that process of meditation and mindful activity, right? Actually being in the present moment was the most dramatic thing in terms of changing both my physical and my mental and also my spiritual health, right? It's having that sense of fulfillment as well. One of the things that I think sort of changed things for me was when I learned about this difference between Chronos time and Kairos, and how I could become more mindful, right, about what I was doing, and be intentional about every moment, and not just, doing arbitrary gratitude practices where you write out things you're grateful for, but you're not feeling any emotion as you do it. Actually just living with gratitude and kind of capturing those moments that I have with my kids. Because maybe, if you're a busy working mom, you can't have as many moments as you would like to have, but you can indulge the moments that you do have at a much greater level and almost take snapshots in your mind and create memories and
Yeah,
things. That for me has been really powerful. Don't know about you.
exactly. I love the like the garbage time, I call it. Like, when you're just hanging out, nothing's happening, not doing anything, or you're just like getting ready for the school run or whatever it is. Like those are where you're bonding, you're together. And sometimes those are the moments where I find myself being like, all right, come on, you have to hurry up, like we haven't got enough time, like get really short. And I think that's coming from within me, like, and I don't need to let myself be triggered by that. And it's just much nicer to feel like you have a control, and you can just like, we're running late, it's fine, we'll just have to try better tomorrow, just kind of enjoying all of the moments rather than always looking forward to something. It's nice to have a holiday in the calendar, or something like a treat to look forward to, but definitely this all came about when I look back, and also experienced burnout. I think my kids were about 3 years old, and it was not long after I went back to work full time. And that transition was just like insane, going from full time mum at home to working full time, kids in nursery. Like I ended up getting pneumonia because I kept working, kept going, even though I caught a cold. And then just realizing that there's nobody to look after you when you're the one that looks after everyone. And I think that was the first time I experienced, like, I didn't listen to my body, and that was really silly, and this is what happened. And then I had to pull in help from all sorts of people to help me take care of my kids while I got well again. I didn't like that experience, so I must listen before it gets to that point. And I think that's something, as women, we put other people's needs ahead of our own, and so often we don't listen to that. And I think you picked up on my recent post on intuition, which came from a place of me not listening to myself, in not only that led to my burnout, but even just being unhappy in my own marriage, and this realizing that I have a choice there, and not being scared of the unknown. And I think that really kind of changed my life in a way, for the best. But it really made me see that I know when I'm listening to my own inner voice, and I know when I'm not. And there has to be a time where you start to stop pushing that aside, because it only just comes back to get you. And I think we can all relate to that. We, particularly women, and we have this heightened intuition, and it's really like magic. And we know when we're overriding it. And I think we just really have to make sure that we have that pause, we have enough space in our day to be able to listen if we're doing the right thing or not.
Yeah, I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper on that with you. But one thing I'll say, just to sort of like validate the evidence, I guess, around what you were saying about how our heart knows, and how like we might approach a busy time even, or what you call, was it dustbin time, did you say?
Garbage time.
Differently. What was it?
Garbage time.
Garbage time. So, we in our programs, we use a medical grade HRV device to take assessments. And what's been really, really interesting is that when we look at mums who are in that rush with maybe 4 or 5 kids, but that's their purpose, that they love being with them, we see heart rate variability increase even beyond where it is in sleep. And then when we see people who are very, and there's no judgment here, right? Because we all have rush days and it'll be different on every day, who are just feeling really, really stressed. And it's like, I just need to get the kids to bed. Their heart rate variability is really dropping. And so it's kind of like, not only does it make the moments more magical if you can just bring that pause, because it's going to take what it takes to do it, right? You've got to get them to school, you've got to get them to bed. But also what we see is it's improving your nervous system health, which in turn is taking care of you. And it just makes the whole experience so much nicer. So I love what you said there. The heightened HRV. Intuition. Sorry?
I was going to say, I love that about HRV. One thing that I found quite fascinating when learning about HRV was how the sort of electromagnetic power of the heart can be felt outside the body at quite some distance. I can't remember the exact distance. I'm sure that's easy to look up. And it's more powerful than the brain. And so your HRV is kind of like a metric of that. And kids, I think, don't have the ability, or they're developing the ability to self-regulate their nervous system. And, there's lots of talk about teaching kids mindfulness and meditation and all of these things. And I think that's great. But also, maybe they're not, until a certain age, supposed to be able to regulate. And instead, they kind of phase lock onto your heart rate variability. So, and this is something that I've written about in the book. So if you imagine like these pendulums in a clock shop all hanging on a wall, eventually all those pendulums start to sync up with each other. So they're all swinging in sync. And when somebody's crying and upset, like a child trips over, falls, or hurts themselves, or somebody takes their toy and they're crying, uncontrollably upset, and you go in to hug them, you're bringing them close to the electromagnetic waves from your heart. If your heart is calm and your heart rate variability is strong, their heart starts to phase lock onto yours as a means to help calm them down. And so as a parent, you need to have this capacity to be calm, because your kids are going to be using you to help them regulate their nervous system. And I think so many parents are just completely frazzled because we live in a world where parenting is really hard. Both parents working, long hours, commutes, nursery runs, school runs, all of the stuff, the demands on parents that we have. And we've sort of squeezed out all of the support networks and community that we used to have. And so you've got a stressed parent, which will then mean you've got a stressed child, and so there's these kind of bigger implications, particularly as mothers. I think as we hold a bigger weight on our shoulders. But having that ability to measure your HRV, as you said, the way you do it with a real highly sensitive device, then you have that feedback loop of like, oh yes, and it sharpens that intuition, because you subtly know that you're a little bit frayed, but you're not bringing in the things to help you come back to a state of calm. Push them aside and keep going on with the day. But when you have that data in front of you, you can't really hide. And it's a kind of good nudge to be like, okay, if I want to show up as my best self to the people around me, then, I need to put in some things in place in my day. And these, almost feel like a luxury, but they have to be a priority, I think.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree. I think they do. And I think, as you say, it does give you a nudge, because suddenly it's like wearing a continuous glucose monitor. You can actually see and get direct feedback on what that food is doing. Here, you're getting direct feedback in the moment. And unfortunately, the kind of wearable devices are not quite there. And it's not something to wear all the time.
Yeah.
It's just to take a few assessments and check in and go,
Yeah.
oh, yeah. And then you start, as you say, you get your intuition and your. I love this idea of being in resonance, right, with what you want, and what you were speaking about there around pendulums. There's a really great book, I don't know if you've read it, around pendulums, called Reality Transurfing by
I haven't read it, but
Vadim
it sounds like
Zeeland. Yeah, it's quite
great.
interesting, and how you can kind of get drawn into sort of negative or positive pendulums and effectively create these bubbles, which are energy, right? As you're saying. Yeah. And the Heart Math Institute have done a lot of research, haven't they, around how you can feel the vibration of the heart outside the body and things like that. Women's intuition. Tell us a little bit more about that, because I saw your post on this and how we have a larger corpus callosum, which is this centerpiece, right, that connects the right left brain. I know that's enhanced with meditation, which is a big practice of yours. What's happening there? Because we do seem to have this instinct, right, of knowing. You can read the energy in a room when you walk into it quite often. You know if your child's had a bad day and they're not yet telling you. What's going on there?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And again, this was kind of born out of personal experience. I think I was always called somebody who was too sensitive, which is kind of annoying from childhood. And then feeling like I could pick up on the energy in a room really quickly, and I could pick up on people's vibes really quickly. But sometimes I'd do this kind of self-silencing thing where I wouldn't actually say something, even though it felt like I should. And then looking, at particularly, I think, in like romantic relationships, looking for threads of like the learnings of like why relationships didn't work, and where I would always go to like, it was me and something I did, and that kind of striving, which I think maybe a lot of women can relate to, like must do better at everything, must love more, must force them to love me, must do more, must be more, and then actually realizing that wait, they didn't have the capacity for like feeling the emotions, or they didn't have the particularly for men, I think, get quite scared of women's emotions, instead of just being like a container for them. You don't have to fix, you don't have to tell me what to do, but you just have to let me express this feminine part of me. And I think that can be quite frightening for men, and men tend to lean more on the avoidance side as well. So when it gets a bit too intense, they're like, oh, can't deal with that. And I think I just had a big kind of revolution, like leaving my marriage and everything, and thinking, Jesus, I just didn't listen to my intuition. Now I'm in my 40s, it's got to change. And I did this like bit of research which led to me doing the post, which is still going viral now. Like I still every day wake up to like hundreds of notifications, and it's all women going, "Oh my god, I feel seen. This is me." And so, you know, when we look at the evolution side of things, and I think I love evolutionary biology, and I think that it feels like magic, but it's not, because there's obviously science to support it. But the brain is different in women, and this, as you mentioned about the larger corpus callosum, this seems to be from birth. So obviously we have male female like genetic differences that you're born with, but then obviously we have societal impact that would shape us, and then things like menstruation and puberty and hormonal changes. So there's like other factors as well. So this heightened intuition feels like it's the culmination of all these different things, starting with the fact that that part of our brain is bigger. But as you said, we can also work on that with practices like meditation. So a lot of us, I think, we really lose our intuition. I certainly did. Or you kind of know it's there, but you're overriding it constantly. You sort of almost gaslight yourself. And then things like estrogen is really sharpening our emotional intelligence. So particularly at certain times of the month, you know, this is, you know, phases of the menstrual cycle, you're going to have an even sharpened sense of this. And I think it's a survival, you know, it comes from ancient times, because there was a huge cost to getting pregnant. You know, if we go back in history to our ancestors, a lot of babies died, you know, at birth. In the first 5 years, a lot of mothers would die in childbirth. So, and you also wouldn't be as able to provide. So you need that network of people around you. So you have to know who are the good ones, who's going to be around you to support you. So we're kind of more genetically programmed, but also more socialized to sort of read micro expressions, read things from partners of the opposite sex, because they could be potentially fathering children that then we would be the ones carrying. And we have to recognize when there's deception. So I just think we're all often hear that women are overthinkers, but I think it's just that people don't like to hear this inner intelligence, and we're often not listening to that own voice and having that confidence to say, actually, this doesn't feel right. Particularly in relationships, I think we stay thinking it'll get better, he will change, I'll be the one to make him you know, be the person and love me in the way I need. And actually, you know, you're just too much and he can go and find less. That was my conclusion. And not to shrink ourselves, not to, you know, push that down. But it seems like it's resonated with women all over. So I know that I'm not alone. We just need to teach our daughters and sons, you know, how to use this to make the world a better place.
Yeah, we do, definitely, for sure. It's funny because I feel like, you know, I've got two boys and a girl. I feel like boys, one of mine definitely is very sensitive. He has that. But I feel like at a younger age, boys seem to have that more. So like when they're
Yes.
toddlers, they're very hooked into you, right? And your emotion, they notice if you're not happy, or if you're, like you were saying, they're not regulating their nervous system so well. So they're picking up on yours and they're like, "Mummy, are you
Yeah.
okay?" And yeah, and I wonder how much of it is a kind of cultural thing that boys sort of depart
Yeah.
from that because they're embracing more of that masculinity and simplifying things
Yeah.
and saying, "No, I'm okay," and things like that.
I definitely think it would be a spectrum, because I have boy girl twins, and my son is definitely like a big empath, and he will look at me and be like, "You're not okay," and just pick up. He can really pick up on things. So I think it's not a strict kind of like male female divide, and we each have both those masculine and feminine parts to us. And I think it's something that we need to make everyone aware of, so that they can understand, and between men and women understand each other a little bit better.
Yeah, for sure. As a busy mum, so you've mentioned meditation. Give us a little bit of an insight. I mean, a busy single mum now, right? So that's even more of a challenge. How do you design your day so that this is your third book, and you're still, I think, you're talking about other ones in the pipeline. You consult with companies, you have clients, you're so busy. How are you designing your day and making space for this? And probably, I would say, probably you have deep work sessions and things, I don't know, but what can you share with our audience that could give them some insights and tips?
Yeah, I think you have to find what you're willing to compromise on, because there's always a compromise. And for me, I need to have the foundations of my health in place, because I got to show up for work, got to show up for kids, and there's nobody there to sort of catch me if something happens. So even if, I was to catch a cold in winter, I need to have a good foundation of health in place so that I can recover as quickly as possible, because there's no kind of safety net, as it were. And so I think definitely after going through burnout and like transition back to work with when my kids were really little, I kind of made peace with the fact that my compromises would be that, I cannot remember the last time I watched TV. Like I don't know the last time I watched something on Netflix or whatever. I don't miss it, and that's me, and that's something that I have compromised. So that time that I might use watching TV, I read, I meditate. In the evenings, I do a lot of yoga and like down reg kind of breath work, because a lot of that's linked to when my kids were born. They were born premature, which is common with twins. And I developed a kind of hypervigilant insomnia, where I would wake up in the night. I could hear them crying. I thought, they were stopping breathing. I got really into this terrible cycle, and I suffered with that for really a long time until I could bring my nervous system down. So I protect my evenings, and I make sure that I have that kind of like, like a gentle coming into land, so that I transition well into sleep and I get quality sleep. And that's kind of like the foundation. Occasionally I have a deadline and I'll be on my computer late, and it's not perfect, but I think it's about what you do most of the time. So most of the time I have this really solid evening routine that helps me sleep. So the odd night that I don't get to do that, I have the resilience built in. And I think that's something to remember. I just gave up trying to be perfect on everything. Same with diet. Like, I cook at home most of the time. We try and eat really well, like never buying processed food. I like cooking anyway, so I'm making everything from scratch. But there will be times where, I don't know, you're on holiday or you're traveling or you're just out of your routine or you're with friends, and you don't have the same access to prepare food that you'd like. But because you've got such a solid foundation, those things don't matter. It's like, look at the big pattern overall. And that's your foundation. And so, I don't watch TV. I really made movement sort of baked into my life now, like in such a way that I don't have any goals. I'm not trying to. Sometimes I get a bit, competitive with myself, and I want to do a PB on a run, but I run 2 or 3 times a week. I do one really like intense session in the gym with weights, because that's all I can fit in. And actually, when I speak to people who are like, "Oh, I'm trying to go to the gym like 5 times a week," and I think, I get more out of one really good session, and I work with a trainer, and I've worked with him for like about 8 years now. I get more out of that one session, and I'm in better shape than I've ever been in my life, than if I was to go on my own 5 times a week. I just don't think I would achieve the same. So it's kind of like looking for those efficiencies. Going and working with a trainer who really understands you and your body, and who can really like work on what you want to work on in a really efficient way, might be a better use of your time than trying to drag yourself to the gym every day and fit it in around kids and clubs and school run and work. And the running I do like first thing in the morning as soon as I wake up. So like 6 a.m. I'll go out and run, and then I get it out the way. I also took up jiu-jitsu just because I always wanted to, and the time felt right. So I do that as often as I can, sometimes 3 times a week, because I kind of like the mind puzzle that it presents, and it's a real massive challenge, and I'm absolutely shit, but I will keep going because I like that I have something to work on. So, you put your energy and obviously money where you want to, and that I think is really important. And I don't drink alcohol at all. Again, that was something I gave up a few years ago. I never was a big drinker, but then I'd be invited with friends on a Friday night. I'd have some wine with a meal, and then the Saturday I'd wake up feeling so like groggy, and then I wouldn't go for a run, and then I'd be a bit tired because I wouldn't have slept well, and I'd be a bit grumpy with the kids. I'd not like myself for being grumpy, and I just want the day to be over. And the trickle down effect from a couple of glasses of wine, I think, especially when you're habitualized to that, I think you just give it a go, and see how you feel. Like, give it at least a few months of zero alcohol and see if you notice a difference, and then decide how you want that relationship to look like. But I think we have a lot of cognitive dissonance because it's like, oh, but I like alcohol, I don't really want to give that one up. But it could be, for me, it moved the needle amazing. It was something quite large that had an impact, and I think people don't even want to try because they haven't addressed their relationship with alcohol yet.
I like what you say about trying it as an experiment. That's how it started for me. There's a great new book out called
Yeah.
Tiny Experiments. I recently interviewed the author, and if you run it as an
Amazing.
experiment, you've given yourself permission, right, to give up. And that's what it was like for me.
Yeah.
I read that 66 days was the research on changing a habit. So I was like, well, I'll do 90 days and just see, because the 30-day no alcohol had never really done anything. I'd always just gone back. And now it's sort of coming up 3 years because it was an experiment I liked and I haven't looked back. And
Yeah.
I very much found what you found, which is my mood is just way more stable with my children without it. So life for me at the moment is better without alcohol in it. But that's not to say that I'm then saying I'll never drink in my life again. Do you know what I mean? I don't think we have to talk in absolutes, do we? I think that's the
No,
thing, because then almost you
exactly.
don't take action, as you say.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, perhaps if you had a problem with alcohol, then abstinence might be really important. But, I in the last 5 years, I maybe have had the odd glass of wine at an event or a celebration, haven't really thought about it, haven't really had to think, well, I'm a non-drinker. It's just like, it felt right at the time, I'll do it. But generally speaking, like most of the time I won't. And I think the tiny experiment thing, I love the sound of that. Really want to read that book. And I think, like you say, when you frame it as that, it's less of like, oh my god, I have to give up this thing that I love and it's connected to my whole social world, and life will be really depressing without it. It's like, no, I'm just going to try. At any point I can go back. It doesn't, there's no judgment on myself. And I think looking at through that lens for a lot of things, because a lot of our issues with food and diet come back to our relationship with food. Most of the time we're not eating because we're hungry, we're eating because we're sort of soothing some other part of us. And so just having a moment to examine that relationship with that thing, whatever it is, and then trying to then say, okay, I'm going to do an experiment and I can give up at any point. And you don't even need to announce it to the world. It doesn't have to be, that there's people keeping you accountable. It's just you on your own journey. And that's what life should be. It should be trying things. It should be experimenting. It should be evolving and growing, and evolving to the challenges that the changing society presents to us. Because that's what nature is. It's a series of mistakes that evolves to adapt, and that's what we are part of nature. And I think we should keep that in our minds.
Yeah, so true. And that curiosity and that sort of a observer effect, which actually kind of comes back full circle, right, to meditation, because that's what gives you the power to observe your thoughts. How do you design your work then? Are you working when the kids are at school? We're coming up to school holidays. How's that all fitting in as a single mum?
Yeah, that's the perpetual challenge. I think I feel like I've been a parent long enough that I'm like, I shouldn't be surprised when school holidays roll round. And I've got really good at doing things off the cuff and less about having a real fixed plan in place, because I just realize I don't have enough time to have everything perfectly planned. I have to be a bit flexible with myself. So I do 2 really long days where they're doing like after school clubs and stuff. And then on days like today, I just work during the school hours. So that way I can drop them off at school, I can pick them up at 3, and we've got that bit of the day together, which just at this age is really nice, because in a few years they will be teenagers and they may not want to hang out with me after school. So I'm kind of making the most of it now. And so Tuesday, Wednesday I do that, and then Friday kind of varies depending what's going on with work. So that's my kind of routine at the moment. But because I really enjoy my job, like I will do stuff, after they go to bed, or more often than not, I wake up stupidly early because I'm like this extreme morning person. And so sometimes I just like to sit down first thing in the morning and get through all the kind of emails or admin, or kind of plan for the day so that I can make best use of my time before my kids wake up. And I've got so used to just taking them along with me, like during school holidays. Like I just, it's not always available to everyone, but I'll take them to the gym with me. I'll bring them along to jiu-jitsu with me, because otherwise I end up not being able to go. And so I just had to kind of be like, well, if I'm going to make this work, then there has to be flexibility, and I'm just going to ask, and is it okay if I bring my kids and they'll bring books and stuff to keep themselves entertained, or they might join in the gym. And so, once you sort of break the seal on that and just realize that we have all these kind of norms in society, but really sometimes you just have to do things a bit differently and create your own norms.
For sure. And I love what you're modeling there, right? Is that you also count, and that prioritizing you is
Mm-hmm.
important, because that's what they're going to take on, right? They're not going
Yeah.
to prioritize themselves as adults if they don't see you doing it. I think I read somewhere, your children will never listen to you, but you can kind of be damn sure that they'll be 100% accurate becoming you, or something like that. And it might not
Yes,
be that they
exactly.
do
You might have
everything,
to
but they do, right?
tell
Yeah,
them
it's
20
really
times to put the sheet on and get ready, brush the teeth. But yeah, they're observing, and they learn what they live. So I think, again, like showing that you are also a human being, your body and your mind need certain inputs to stay healthy, and role modeling that to them, like creating your own norms at home. I find that's been incredibly useful, like right from the start, when they see me eating a certain way and they're familiar with certain food being on their plate, then that creates a norm in their mind, and that's an anchor, so that later on when they do go out with their friends as teenagers, or they leave home, they might veer off and eat terribly for a few years, but they kind of anchor back to what this foundation that they were given when they were younger. And so seeing a parent who is active and trying new things that they might not be very good at, but taking care of their body, I think those are going to be creating norms in their minds that they will go on their own journey, but they'll always have that to anchor back to.
100%. That's definitely what I found with mine. I found that it's harder when they're young. When they're very young, you've got full control over what they eat. And then as they start
Yeah,
to get older, they want to eat the naughty stuff. And almost it's like, how much resistance do you want to have? Because in reality, what I've
yeah,
found is by the time they get to teenagers, they're just modeling what you did. And now they come full circle. But that's been my experience with
yeah,
each of them. They're eating healthily, they're working out, they're
yeah.
exercising, they're into all their sports, because
Amazing.
they've kind of just modeled what you did. And, it's only a few
Yeah,
years when they're trying to push that boundary. There's always different boundaries, aren't they, that they push.
yeah.
Immune to Age is the it's all good fun. Immune to Age is the title of the book. Tell us
Hmm.
about what sparked that title. I love it. How can we become immune to age? Like I think for me, it's not about living longer necessarily. It's all about quality,
Mm,
to have these experiences that you're talking about there, and that requires high energy. Tell us about the title and how
yes.
we can become immune to age.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was influenced definitely by the longevity conversations that are happening, the popularity in that movement, both in science and on social media, and then layered on top of that this kind of paradox of time where we have these triumphs of modern medicine, and we've overcome many things to be able to live longer, but we're not living well. And particularly, I wanted to write. I've also written 2 books about the immune system, but I wanted to write about the immune system and how it changes over our life course, because it's a very dynamic system, and I wanted to sort of cover right from sort of cradle to grave. So the book actually starts in what I call the winter years. So that's sort of from your 70s onwards, and it looks at what might be happening in your immune system at that age. And it also that feeds into things like your microbiome, and the sort of hallmarks of aging that we now have defined, and how inflammation is really linked to everything. So no matter which part of the aging process you're looking at, you have this smoldering chronic inflammation that grows with time and becomes much more pronounced at old age. And there's it's not a commercially available test yet, but there is a sort of immune age test that you can do, and it's basically how robust is your immune system to still fight off infections when you're in your 70s and beyond, but keep on top of that smoldering chronic inflammation, which is kind of to some degree happening to everyone. And those are the people that are living, these centenarians with these amazing health, 100 years plus. And sort of looking at that and saying, what is it that those people are doing? And it's not necessarily that they are significantly different to the rest of us, but it's that they seem to be able to keep on top of this inflammation. And so then the book goes through the seasons of life. So it starts in winter, Then it goes into autumn, which is kind of the midlife years, and it looks at the demands. I have a chapter all about the midlife gut. I speak to so many people with gut issues in midlife, and they're like, but I eat so well now. And I'm like, yeah, but your gut health is kind of like the result of the previous decades of your life. So when you start to look at those antecedents, like tracing back from birth, you're like, and that's why you have gut health issues now. And now you've sorted out your diet and you eat really well, but there was like a fingerprint left from the previous decades. And then going into the summer years and looking at the role in things like fertility, the growing cancer rates in young people, and then the spring years, which is obviously from the first 1,000 days, so from conception, birth, beyond, and looking at like childhood food allergies and changing habits and lifestyle behaviors in children. And it does touch on things like, some of the evidence around certain medications and supplements that are coming out and where those might fit in along that life course trajectory. I think one of the challenges with science is that we often look at a snapshot, don't we? We're like, oh, in this healthy population of men aged 20 to 40, we see this happening. And so then you're like, well, how does that extrapolate to when I'm 70? Or how does that, can that be influenced by what happened when I was 10 years old? And so we have very few studies that are longitudinal in a long enough way that can really start to give us tangible things that we know that we can implement. In fact, one of the studies that really influenced me before I wrote the book was the Harvard study of human development, which follows people for over 100 years, one of the longest running studies on adult health. And there's a book that's been written based on the study by the lead researcher, and some of the things that they touch on is things like inflammation, this chronic inflammation across the life course, and this social connection was one of the standout factors that led to a long and healthy life. So again, that's something that I've explored in the book, like why we need these social connections, why we're kind of wired for connection, how that influences things like stress and what we were talking about earlier with HRV, and sort of that co-regulating and the people that we have in our environment. And I know from my own reflections, like how hard I found it to ask for help, but then just knowing that that's going to relieve so much stress and like a pressure valve, knowing that I might not have any family that live anywhere close to me, but you have to build a community of people where you have that support network, because, sometimes things happen, or you get sick, or you need help with the kids, and that stress that you carry as a parent while you're moving through the rest of your day and work demands and all that sort of thing, it's incredibly detrimental for our health. And particularly in the chapters on midlife, like looking at stress and how midlife is meant to be this time where you've got it all, you've made it to a certain rank in your career, you're probably a homeowner, and you have found your life partner, and you've achieved tick children, tick mortgage, but yet these are probably the people, and some of the data shows the most unhappy, the most stressed. And I certainly resonated with that and thought, gosh, is this what I've been working for my whole adult life, to be like trapped in this squeeze? And just like, how can we make midlife better? What is it that's going wrong, and what can we do to change and have a bit more power over our lives in that stage, so that that's a really critical stage for preparing for the next chapter, which is when you're 70, when you're retired, and making sure that you can enjoy that. And I think the other bit that I tried to weave in is the bit around fate. Our ancestors would really have an open relationship with the idea of fate. Like, tomorrow you might get hit by a car, and having this perfect routine and perfect health was all well and good, but it didn't matter in that moment. And just kind of like, know that you're doing your best and you're trying to care for yourself and your body, your mind, the people around you. But we cannot forget that there's always going to be fate, and there's always going to be things beyond our control.
Yeah, so true. It's that sort of stoic philosophy, isn't it, around it, that we can't kind of control everything, and it could end at any time. When you looked into there's so much there, and I think everyone's going to be super excited when the book comes out in July. You touched there around these increasing rates of cancer that we're seeing in young people. There seem to be so many theories around it. Why are we seeing so much bowel cancer? I've seen people talk about just how disrupted the microbiome is from all the antibiotics that's in like the meat that we eat, and then we have like big pesticide exposure. Even if we're eating, and I think this is what's hard for people, right? Is even if we feel like we're eating a really good diet and we're not eating ultra processed foods, we're exposed to things, and it can be really hard for people to make good decisions within their budget. When you were researching that, how much of it came down to things like ultra processed foods or stress, as you've mentioned? What have you found there?
Yeah, well, I think something that kept coming out was the microbiome, and particularly around things like bowel cancer. I think one thing that hasn't been recognized so much in the cancer field is that how much our immune system is kind of unappreciated as our cancer defense system. Like all the time we have our natural killer cells, which are immune cells, they're like moving around our body, and they're one of their main aims is to perform surveillance effect and pick off any potentially cancer fighting cells. And this sort of cancer immunosurveillance, was something that was discovered back in the 50s. And now we have things like immunotherapies that use the immune system to target cancer. So it's only, decades later that we've actually made that into a therapeutic treatment. But just understanding that we have to take care of our immune system in order to keep that cancer immunosurveillance function happening. And while we have so many things that cause that unwanted inflammation, so your immune system's always having to deal with challenges, then I think that's sort of eroding the capacity to perform that cancer immunosurveillance. And then things like the gut microbiome, obviously the gut is a huge source of immune regulation. And when we look at some of these stats around the growing cancer rates and look at the age of the people and sort of map things back, we have correlations with when antibiotic use came in and became routine. And I think that, that cannot be ignored. It's really, it's really tricky, isn't it? Because we've all probably had antibiotics, and they have such a random effect on the microbiome. You see this in studies in mice, particularly. You can give very homogeneous animals the same antibiotic, but how they recover from those antibiotics will be quite sporadic. Like a year later, some have not recovered at all, and their flora is completely different, with some bugs completely dominating. Some will be back to kind of pre-antibiotic state after 6 to 8 weeks. So I think if we look at that through the lens of humans, you think that when we're all being given antibiotics, some of us somehow have that resiliency in the ecosystem to return to the pre-antibiotic state within quite a short period after the antibiotics have finished. Whereas other people, it's knocking out, whole populations and leaving gaps where you have a kind of monocropping or opportunistic microbes growing in those spaces. And then it's completely changing that gut environment. And the thing about inflammation is that it's the gut is a huge potential source of inflammation, because you have loads of microbes, you have this very delicate barrier, and then you have loads of immune cells, and immune cells get triggered by microbes to produce inflammation. So the microbes have to be in the right place and not through the gut leaking, getting into the bloodstream where they're triggering inflammation. And there was a German physician, Rudolf Virchow, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, and he made an observation, which was back in like the 1800s, that tumors often developed in areas of the body that were plagued by chronic and persistent inflammation. And so his hypothesis at that time, and you must imagine they had quite rudimentary ways of measuring this, but he observed this, and he suggested that cancer didn't arise out of nowhere, but it was being nurtured in areas where inflammation was lingering. So cancers arise in the context of chronic inflammation. Because inflammation is meant to be toxic for microbes. So you've got an infection, you get inflammation, makes the microbe uncomfortable, gets rid of the microbe. But there's a collateral damage that the inflammation is only meant to be short term, because while you're attacking the microbe and making it really uncomfortable and spitting lots of toxic stuff on it, that's also having a collateral effect on the surrounding environment. And so this creates an environment ripe for DNA damage and mutations and ultimately cancer. So I think we have to view cancer not as an isolated thing in a specific part of the body, but part of a much larger narrative in which the body's trying to protect itself from whatever reason that's causing the chronic inflammation, like a lingering infection or something. But that's tragically at the same time it's undoing. And we see this time and time again with the immune system. It's doing something good, it's triggered by something, but it has a knock-on effect that's actually bad. And so you're constantly realizing that it's this kind of dynamic balance that we have to keep in check across the duration of the life course, because some inflammation is good, it's useful, but some is too much, and then it becomes harmful. And I think that this is part of the whole narrative about what we're seeing in cancer in younger bodies that would traditionally have been more resilient to these cancers, but we just have so many more like assaults on the body that are coming from diet and lifestyle and microbiome, but then also the things that we're exposed to, all of the sort of pollutants that we're having exposed to our body all the time. So yeah, it's a big complex question, but I do feel that is something that globally we need to be really hyper aware of and trying to change the trajectory of now. It's I think it's no accident that many of these early onset cancers are appearing in the gastrointestinal tract. That's where we have not only the microbiome, not only a greater inflammatory loads, but we're breathing in things and swallowing toxins in the air, all of the things that we're exposed to. And I think there's hints that some of that increase in colorectal cancer is seen in people who consistently eat these really inflammatory heavy diets. So again, like that's a huge piece of the puzzle. And then we see the link with antibiotics and certain medications, and so it's a whole big messy piece, but it's something that we definitely need global efforts to solve.
And that's evolving. I think what I've noticed is I feel like it's very confusing for people as well, because you'll hear, like for women, for example, there's lots of stuff on social media now saying estrogen does not cause breast cancer. But then at the same time, there's also a lot of content around women shouldn't be drinking because alcohol reduces your ability to detoxify estrogen and is linked to increased rates of breast cancer. And you take those two things and you go, well, but you just said estrogen doesn't cause breast cancer. So, I think it's really confusing for people.
100%. Yeah.
Isn't it?
And I think, that's, it's hard now to say, because I've just been in the field for so long, but it's hard to say how one should sort of drown out the noise, because obviously you want to get your information from somewhere, you want to feel informed, you want to feel like you're hearing all the latest information, but finding a source that's reliable is also really, really challenging, because I think you see the pendulum swing quite far on both sides, where you get people saying, oh, actually, I'm a dietitian and I ultra processed foods and there's nothing wrong with them. You have that kind of real divisive landscape now, and so I think it is really hard for people to wade through. I would just always say, like, please cast a critical eye on any information that you read and think if it's too good to be true, it probably is. And that, this whole chronic disease landscape is rarely one thing causing one disease. And I think we have to get away from that mindset. That was kind of like 100 years ago. You'd be like, oh, you have tuberculosis. It's caused by this microbe. It's fixed by this antibiotic. So one thing, one disease, one cure. That is not the world we're living in anymore. We still have infectious diseases, but we have this complex landscape where we have growing numbers of cancer, heart disease, neurodegenerative diseases. These are all becoming the big players, and none of them are one thing causing one disease. It's a multitude of factors over many, many decades, which is why it's, we start as early as possible as we can in life. With kids, I think it's just about good habits, good routines, good social norms. And then as an adult, it's about trying to navigate this crazy landscape and make really good informed choices most of the time, as much as we can. And drown out the noise of like one day something's really good for you and the next day it's terrible for you. And think about the holistic picture of what you're putting in your body, not just like, eating eggs, that means it's the same as smoking. Just kind of realize that a lot of the media is there to sensationalize things for clicks.
Yeah, that's so true. What I'm learning from you, Dr. Macciochi, is that, the fundamentals really matter, right? If we get back to the basics of being present to our lives and reducing stress and making space for ourselves and our relationships, we embrace a whole food diet, we get some movement in, and then we just don't guilt trip ourselves and live with some gratitude. We've gone a long way, it sounds like,
Yes.
to protect our health. Is there anything else that you, and obviously our audience can dive deeper and buy the book when it comes out in July, but is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you think I should have asked you? Anything that you think people might keep track of? We talked about HRV, but are there some annual blood tests or other tests, perhaps tests related to inflammation, that people could think about just so they can see and influence how they're aging biologically? What would you leave us with?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biological aging testing realm, I think it's, if you really want to be quite comprehensive, you want to do several types of tests, as many that you can do, and they're all kind of painting a picture, and then you want to monitor that over time. So it's a kind of investment piece if that's what you want to do. Some people really like data and they've got budget to do that, and there's several ways, and I do speak to the different tests in the book. And I think it's quite nice. I think if I had maybe more time and budget, then that's something that I would definitely do. I have done a few of these tests in the past. And I think it's a nice way to have a sort of metric, how accurate they are. We don't know. I would also, don't ignore, I think there's that, again, that kind of human condition where we've spent money on a supplement, therefore that makes us feel like that's an investment in our health, but we're still not doing the fundamentals. But that's okay because we've just bought something. So it's kind of like that mindset shift whereby go for the low-hanging fruit, do the fundamentals, then build in the fancy stuff. So you kind of see it as a pyramid where in the bottom layer you have to have all the fundamentals in place most of the time, again, not looking for perfection. And then in the middle layer, it's getting a little bit more into your sort of longevity, maybe supplements and practices that we're coming through in the evidence. And then in the top layer, it's going to the real kind of niche wellness. You've got money to spend, it's fun to do, they're probably harmless, and I think at the top of that triangle is just growing that sort of awareness. I would definitely say it's good to monitor your vitamin D. I think magnesium is a really important one to keep at healthy levels. Omega-3, like these are things that are all coming out now as like good to keep them in the healthy realm across the life course before you even get into the more complex nuance of longevity supplements. I think like go for those ones. Creatine I love, I think particularly for women. Again, lots of longevity benefits, and taurine as well coming out. And those are things to kind of build in. And then, it's kind of watch this space with some of the other supplements, I think, particularly for longevity.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting when I was speaking to the scientists at Glycanage, and they were saying how some of these people are taking so many supplements, and it's almost the extreme biohackers that are doing every type of hormetic stress possible with a huge stack of supplements, and they're actually aging ahead of their chronological age as a result. And it's funny because when I did mine, I got it really low. I wasn't taking anything. I was just doing the basics. Do you know what I mean? I was just going to bed and getting enough sleep, moving, eating well. My stress was lower. And then, when I repeated it, I could see that stress. And I think, the fundamentals that you've spoken about are just so important.
And I think that's funny, isn't it? There's a lady online, is she not aging slower than Brian Johnson, but it's just purely from like a good healthy diet and lifestyle and a couple of supplements, whereas he's spending millions.
Yeah, it's Julie Gibson Clark. Yeah, she's been, I met with her in London a couple of months ago. Yeah, she's been on the show. She embraced, Sarah Dr. Sarah Gottfried or Dr. Sarah Saul now, her
Mm,
ethos around having a pound of vegetables a day and things like that. It was all the simple
yeah,
practices with, she'd obviously used the Novos
yeah,
supplement as well. But yeah, I think it is
yes,
about
yeah,
simplicity. Before you
yeah.
go
And
and
I
link
think
to everything, is there anything I haven't asked you that you would like us to know?
um yeah, I don't know actually. We covered a lot of ground. Um Yeah, I think it just, this is something I posted on my Instagram yesterday, but and my early conversation with my literary agent was when I realized that the success of the Uber was because you suddenly took the stress out of waiting on a taxi. You could see the little car on the map, like driving around, and so even if it was delayed, you still could see where the driver was. Whereas when you just call a cab and it hasn't shown up, and you're like stressed about getting to where you need to be. And I kind of started to think about life like that. Like, if I knew how many days or weeks I had left, like, what would I do differently? And I think it's quite powerful. And I think we don't really want to sort of meditate on our own death because I don't know, it feels quite morbid, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'd start like filling every day with extreme activities, but I would probably, well, I try to view that sort of garbage time with my kids in a different lens. Like, we're just not doing anything. We're just hanging out, pottering about the house, like even tidying up, doing laundry, like just start to view it all differently. And I found it so powerful and so helpful, but it took me many years to convince myself to start to look through this lens. But I just have
Mm.
such a deeper sense of contentment and peace now, which then trickles down to everything else I do. There's less resistance, there's less friction to doing things, and I think that made me realize that a lot of the suffering I created in my own mind, and it's my mind, and I can figure a way to let that suffering go and let that resistance go. So I would say to anyone, just dabble in that space and do it with an open mind, and it might make all of the other stuff much easier.
I love that. What a great place to close. Thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing all of this. Please link, where can people, I know you're super active on Instagram. I love all your content. You're onto your third book coming out in July. How can people connect with you and everything that all the goodness you're putting out in the world?
Thank you. Yeah, so the Instagram handle is just my name. So it's Dr.Jenna_Macciochi. And from there, you'll have all the links in my bio. I've tried to have more than one social media platform, but I just can't fit it in my life. So I just make Instagram my home. I do have a website, which I vaguely update, but if you want all the kind of up-to-date information and things around book release and other work that's going on, then it's all kind of there at home in my Instagram. And I love when people reach out with questions. It's always good to know what questions people have, what things are challenging them, what content they'd like to see. So please do reach out and let me know.
Amazing. Thank you, Jenna. We will link to all of that in the show notes. And yeah, thanks again for coming on. Look forward to the book.
Thanks for having me.